Okay, I think we're ready. To go. Thanks for everybody for coming. This is a joint workshop of the Town Council, Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals. As such, asked Council President Ward to open the meeting.
Sure. So the time is 7 p.m. on August 22nd. I'll call to order the meeting of the Bridgewater Town Council. We have two councilors that can't attend tonight, Councilor Lindy and Councilor George.
Thank you. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to have these incredibly impressive professionals here to talk about the things that we're doing with Vision to Reality. In 9 months, I think we've come a long way in moving this initiative. I like to say that we're doing a 10-year plan in 5 years, and we're half year into it, so we still have a lot to do in the next 4.5 years. This is an important step in that direction. We're fortunate to have Jamie Brad with us this evening. Jamie is a Senior Vice President and Business Line Leader at Fuss & O'Neill. I've worked with Fuss & O'Neill throughout my career. They're working with us here in Bridgewater as well. Jamie brings a background in community development. Like myself, her career is both in the public sector and the private sector, which I think for many of us makes us more informed in terms of how we approach these types of projects. We also have with us Hillary Fagan, who is a Vice President at CBRE Group. I always want to call it CB Richard Ellis, but she only can't say that. It did. Similar to Jamie and myself, Hillary was the former President and Chief Operating Officer of the Rhode Island Commerce Corporation, which is the state of Rhode Island's economic development agency. Prior to that, she has experience on Wall Street at NASDAQ and now with CBRE Group. So I think they're going to offer a lot of insight and perspective in terms of what is going on in the market, what's required to do the type of development that we're talking about, what some of the challenges are, and then some of what the opportunities are. So I'm going to allow them to do their presentations. I'll ask them some questions. I just ask that if you all have questions or comments, we save those to the end. So without further ado, if you can just hit the center button there. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. The guy paying the rent should be able to talk. Those of you who don't know Vinny DiCimino, who is from the president's office. Yeah, but Mike.
I can't believe you got it on me.
Oh.
I'm just kidding. Thank you. I just wanted to say hello on behalf of Bridgewater State University and President Fred Clark. I'm representing him. My job is the special advisor to the president, which is basically a fancy title for I do a lot of the government affairs. I spent 21 years in the Massachusetts legislature, and so had the privilege of working up on Beacon Hill. And I want to say how excited I am about what Bob and Mike have shared with us about this vision and about this, what Bridgewater, what you want to see Bridgewater become. I do a lot with Mike. I've known him for a long time. I used to represent the community that he lives in. And so we have a very strong relationship. And I'm always excited about the creativity of these communities that want to grow. And we live in an amazing area. And the fact that we have public transit right here in the middle of our communities tied into, which is what I find incredibly exciting with the South Coast Rail and that new opportunity of opening up Fall River and Bedford and Taunton into through Bridgewater into Brockton and up into Boston. I just think there's so many opportunities, and I want to congratulate you for seizing on them. We want to welcome you here, and we always continually want to partner with the town of Bridgewater. We believe that we are one and the same. Bridgewater State University and Bridgewater have are equally beneficial of what each others do. And we want to be helpful to what you're trying to do and vice versa. So with that, thank you and welcome to Burnell, which is this old building will be a new building in a year and a half, but over a $40 million project. This entire facility will be redone in here. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. I've been forgotten my better.
Ouch.
Good evening, I'm Jamie, and I just wanted to begin by underscoring the acknowledgement of the incredible time and dedication you all put in on a weekly and monthly basis to help bring about the vision for your town and carry on the legacy for your town that you're proud of. I did about 8 years total in public service, about half of that for a suburban community in Fairfield County, Connecticut, and the other half in Hartford, Connecticut. And I also have worked in Washington, D.C. both for a place-making nonprofit and for a private office developer. During my time in public sector, I did staff the Planning and Zoning Commission, Historic Commission, ZBA, and my favorite story was we went so late one night. I think we were debating whether to put lights on the football field, and that went until about 1 in the morning. And the next day, I gave birth to my second child. So I kind of held that over their heads. You know, all the hard effort that we put in. You know, it really caused a lot of change. But I think at the heart of it, that's what is both the brilliant opportunity and sometimes a very distinct challenge of being in a role like many of you are, that's essentially being planners and executing on plans, because in many instances, your charge is to bring about a vision for a population that does not yet exist in your town, whether that is people that you're trying to attract from other counties or states, or unborn children who are yet to grow up in town. And so balancing the challenges, the constraints of today against these grand visions for tomorrow rests on your shoulders, and it can be a real test of endurance. And I thank you for not only the privilege of being able to have this conversation, but your ongoing dedication to that role as volunteers. So I'll just start by acknowledging again that there is kind of almost like a sibling rivalry, a healthy friction that perennially exists between urban planning and economic development. And I've been fortunate to be in both roles oftentimes at the same time. And planning asks us to kind of tap the brakes. It's about due process and you know, in some cases, conservation and preservation, whereas economic development is a little more opportunistic and of the moment and forward driving. One of the things I thought I would touch on is just trends that we're seeing in projects throughout New England right now, and I think Hillary will also bring to bear some of the incredible research that a large company like CBRE has access to. But we have 10 offices throughout New England, about 350 employees, and so we work with a lot of peer communities. We're seeing, number one, a very, very heightened increase in projects having to do with resiliency and sustainability, even on the public side. That used to mainly be a concern of coastal towns, but it's everywhere now, you know, inland flooding as well, and net zero buildings, you know, that is skyrocketed in terms of funding and in terms of prioritization. Workforce housing, I think will continue to be very critical in the next 4 to 5 years, especially. We're seeing the education and medical sectors, higher ed, be pretty steady in terms of their overall needs and their growth on their campuses. Whereas, of course, I'm sure you've all experienced that the office market has become relatively weak and is leaving opportunity for conversions that didn't previously exist. One of the communities we work with quite a great deal that is I think is worth looking at in terms of that is Manchester, New Hampshire. And they really had a kind of giant sucking sound in their downtown, but have been very aggressive in doing conversions to residential very well. And I think another very interesting facet of the housing perspective is it's pretty tried and true at this point that if you present a developer with, let's say, a 3 to 4 acre parcel, they'll probably want to build a 4-story, we call it stick built, wood frame construction. And it'll end up somewhere, they want it to be somewhere in the range of 175 to 250 units. That's where the deals tend to pencil out at this point in time. However, there are many communities where that level of density doesn't feel right. I'm thinking of Wellesley, Massachusetts on the Cape right now, which recently purchased a 21-acre campgrounds in order to try to bring in some workforce housing. So really exploring a little bit more progressive and creative mixes of density that still feel right for the town and bring about some of that density is another big trend that we're seeing. And lastly is I feel like we're in a really unprecedented time in terms of grant availability for municipalities. I mean, it's just an absolute fire hydrant in multiple different directions, whether you're talking about transportation type infrastructure or economic development or conservation or preservation resiliency. And we're helping quite a number of municipalities prepare pretty sophisticated winning applications for these big dollar elements. And what I mean by that is, in a case of a vision to reality type concept, you may be able to build this patchwork of 5 or 6 or 7 different grants to support that from different angles. And I think you have a real asset in Bob, who has a lot of good track record in laying in pretty large sized grants to bring about that change. And of course, very proud town history as well. So those are just some of the high level trends that we're seeing. I think in a little while, we'll talk more about what developers may be looking for specifically. But I will say I've now visited Bridgewater 3 times. And today I was really highlighted because someone sent me to Hanson's ice cream, before I came here. So I'm really fired up with a lot of sugar and it was delicious ice cream. But I do think, and we'll touch upon this in a minute, that there's some really fundamental aspects that are very positive in your community that leave me very encouraged about your success in bringing out your vision, as well as the effort that you've already put into a very, very good, easy to read, comprehensive plan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Hillary.
Great, thank you. The question I think Bob brought up, which was interesting, is 2 parts. One is what's currently happening, what are we seeing in the market right now, and what is the sense that what will happen in the next few years? I have no idea. I don't know if anyone knows what's going to happen in the next few years. It's an interesting market right now. But in preparing to think about some of the data around what's happening that we can go through, I found an interesting survey from CBRE that I wanted to share. And CBRE is a massive company, has offices in Massachusetts. I'm 4 months in, so I'm learning alongside many of you tonight on some of this data, but they do a great job with research. And they did a poll of 20,000 people worldwide. They wanted to find out, how will people live, work, and shop in the future? So what's coming down the pike? And again, this is a survey, so bear with me. The first category, so there was 4 overarching themes that came out of this massive survey. First category was quality of life. Quality of life now carries far more weight in decision making. So in the past, they had financial factors as a main determinator. Conspicuous consumption was used to motivate consumer choices. But people are now making choices that they believe will enhance their well-being. So I thought that was interesting. On the work front, the overwhelming majority of people attach greater importance to the quality of their working environment, flexibility, location, space design, technology, and services. And then consumers desire seeing higher quality properties offering better facilities and surroundings. So that was the first category that came out of quality of life. Second, on location, it's very important. Location remains central to consumer decisions and continues to dictate where they choose to live, work, and shop. And I pulled out this one sentence I thought was interesting. Substantial proportion of respondents who plan to move their homes stated a preference to live in more centralized areas, with such demand strongest among younger generations. New housing in downtown areas should be developed with these users in mind, which is somewhat thematic to what you're trying to do here. Third major category, ESG. Then they're saying partly due to a pandemic-driven increase in health and safety concerns, ESG and wellness are wielding a far stronger influence on consumer behavior than ever before. And last category, hybrid working. The growing adoption of hybrid working will influence where people choose to work and live. And that's no surprise to anyone. We're reading about it right now. And it's a natural segue into some of the market dynamics that we're seeing. And I start with office because that's where I'm mainly supposed to be working in. It's tricky out there right now in office. This is not going to be a surprise to you. In the US, overall vacancy rate is 18.2% in office. That's a 30-year high. Occupier demand is likely to remain subdued through the second half of 2023 until the economic outlook becomes clearer. And the disconnect is hybrid work. Like companies are trying to figure out how much space do I really need. And so right now, you're seeing a lot of subleases come into the market. Rent concessions are up. Tenant improvement dollars are up, free rent packages are up. So office is a tricky market right now. I looked at the Boston office vacancy rates, lower than the national average. Boston came in at 15.7%, but that's up from 11.6% in 2019. So when you're thinking about asset classes, just, again, no surprise what office is tricky. I'm going to skip to the second category we looked at, multifamily market. Strong demand in this region, that's probably not a surprise to you. The Northeast maintained a top spot for the highest year-over-year rent growth in the second quarter of 23, with a 4.3%. So 4.3% rent growth in the Northeast. Boston was up, and Boston market, so the region was up 4.1%. And I'm based in Providence. I found it interesting that Providence market had a 5.3% rent growth. That's the second highest in the Northeast Mid-Atlantic region. So you've got a lot of housing demand and rents going way up. Multifamily density in transit-oriented district could yield increased retail and commercial activity. So you've got a strong demand in the multifamily market, and that leads to the third segment that we looked at, retail market. I asked our retail broker, I said, what's the secret sauce here? Now, I really wanted the Sweetgreens in downtown Providence. You may want to comment, they're expanding, and how do you get these retailers to come in? And they look at population density, population age, and income levels, and it really is about foot traffic. So they look at competitors that are in the area, and they look at accessibility, public transport, and walkability.
I think that's kind of a myth in the general public sometimes that retail is experimental, because retail brands often want to be perceived as edgy, but in reality, as a real estate buyer or lessee, retail is one of the most conservative. And they will come in last after there's very strong, proven residential. That's right. Market, right?
So those are just some quick highlights. There's a lot of data out there, but I thought that would be interesting to share, and I will pass it back to
Bob's up.
There you go. No, good. So Jamie, just, understanding, office is not a very vibrant market now. There is a known housing crisis within the Northeast, and we have supply chain issues, we have labor issues. But what is, and interest rates are at the highest rate they've been in almost 20 years now. What is the climate right now to try to get projects financed?
Well, let me start with some positive news. most of the developers that I work with who build in that category I was talking about before, you know, maybe 3 to 4 acres, 175 to 250 units, even if that's phased. They don't tend to use banks very much. They tend to either use the profits from their last construction effort, or they have a private stable essentially of investors that put in their own capital to fund those sorts of projects. And so the banking interest rate doesn't seem to bother them as much. What is bothering them a lot, to the point where they may hit the brakes on projects, is the cost of construction. Both in terms of things like steel and lumber, wait times. I'm working on a children's hospital project in Connecticut right now. They had to order their elevator shaft something like 16 months ahead of time. You know, so before we even had zoning approvals, they had to call the major investment to get it on time. So that's sort of lead time, and then of course the cost and availability of labor as well. So I do think that's putting a lot of pressure on developers to ask the question, you know, whether to go forward or not. At the same time, in some ways, real estate development is, you know, a beautiful dragon that's always hungry, you know, so there's this capital that needs to go somewhere. And I think that that is a real boon, especially at this time, to the greater Boston market, the big greater Boston catchment area. And I think Bridgewater would be part of that, because capital is a little bit stifled inside of Boston right now. The development conditions are very difficult. There's a lot of competition, and yet the capital wants to go somewhere. And so that is helping to really spike a demand for developable areas outside of the downtown itself, but that may still have some of those key characteristics of TOD or sense of place and things like that. So yes, there are headwinds. I don't think the market is frozen shut because of it. It may be a little bit down, but not.
I'm gonna come back to Hillary, but one of the questions is whether prepared for this is, both Hillary and Jimmy, is this a good plan? I mean, if this is a bad plan, tell us, to be honest. They're here tonight, so I'm guessing they think it's a good plan, which is encouraging, but you know, I think one of the challenges that we identified is, and I talk about it, is that we need to create a there. So what distinguishes us? We don't have a waterfront. We're not in Boston. So we have to kind of create that opportunity. So having conversations about, you know, relocating the MBTA platform, looking to reimagine what Campus Plaza can be, looking at some of those other surrounding sites. Some developers probably going to be looking for, what can the town give me to incentivize me to come there? And I think, as I've talked about, you know, the fact that we are an MBTA community, we are under a requirement to have zoning in place by December 2024 that is going to show that we have the ability to produce 1,400 more units of housing. And as Jamie mentioned earlier, and I shared an article that was in Boston Globe on Friday, there is a lot of soft free money out there right now, and that can be used for infrastructure improvements, which we need to look at. It can be used for housing, subsidize some of these projects. So, you know, I would just like Hillary to maybe talk about the advantages of trying to do development where you have access to some of this funding, but what the requirements are in order to get that funding.
Sure, and I'll make my comments from my time at the Rhode Island Commerce Corporation, where the quasi-state economic development agency, where when I was hired by then Governor Raimondo, who's now our Commerce Secretary in DC, she recognized the need to bring activity and development to the area. And one of the ways to do it was to get a team together and go out in the world, but more importantly, for credit and incentive programs to help get development done. And I think if you pen out projects, and again, these are comments from my commerce time, you have to understand the cost of builds, cost of labor, cost of materials, that all these developers do the analysis on. And also then you offset some of the tools. How do you get the projects done in the Northeast that has high labor costs, high, the rents, you're not gonna garner the rents here that you would get in Austin, for example. So the tools are important, and the fact that the federal government and the state of Massachusetts is really saying we have tools for development, and I think it could spur some activity. One story I did want to share is a little bit off the beaten path, but Bridgewater State is an asset. Because having a university in your community is a terrific thing. And in Providence, I remember we had 11 institutions of higher ed. RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, is very good in user interface. So how corporations could develop their product and design their products. So we were able to bring companies in, partner them with the university, and create spaces for jobs and collaboration. And I think we could do that here too with some very, very clever kind of shared space concepts. So I just wanted to mention that, and we attached tools to that, credits and incentive programs to that project too. I went off on a tangent, but I think it's a good example.
Do we have to turn off so that you can turn
No,
on?
people can hear me anyways. That's something that, we've talked about. I mean, the co-location or incubation space came up in a conversation that we had as we were talking about putting this workshop together. And I'm glad Vinny's here. I've characterized the cybersecurity program at the university to be our biotech. That's going to be our niche in terms of some economic development expansion. I think that there's going to be businesses that relocate here because of what's coming out of the university. I think there's opportunities for the private sector to collaborate with the university on these types of programs. We've seen that the cyber program at Joint Base Cape Cod has been closed down because of some security issues. Undetermined now whether the Department of Defense is going to privatize, working with public sector, private sector PPVs going forward on some of these types of things. But that is an opportunity for us. And when we talk about the types of housing that we're looking for, the types of subsidies, it's not just for infrastructure, but there could be job training money, there could be business expansion money. And I think that, I've said this from the very beginning, that I think Bridgewater has a very unique story to tell in terms of how we are approaching this. I challenge anyone to tell me of another community that's doing something that's comprehensive anywhere in the country, because I don't think it's happening. But that's not to say that there is not a learning curve. And what we're trying to do here tonight is flatten out that curve in terms of some of the realities that exist in the marketplace. Again, we have to make ourselves attractive, and talking about, again, Vinny mentioned, us collaborating with the university. We're not doing enough anymore. I mean, we want to do so much more, and I think in the 9 months that I've been here, not saying it was bad at all prior to that, but we're having a lot more conversations. I mean, I have a meeting with the cyber leaders of the cyber program next Monday. We're talking, and as we improve downtown, the university benefits. We benefit from the university's expansion. But one of you maybe talk about your experiences where that collaboration with the public-private sector, or two on the public sector. And I think, again, we see that a lot in Providence. I mean, certainly with Brown and BC, but also in Hartford, you got at Wesleyan or Trinity, I'm sorry, and University of Hartford, and then you had a UConn branch. That how there's some synergy of all those things.
It's good you corrected yourself there.
I know.
Trinity grad.
I know.
Can't let a Wesleyan come into the conversation.
But, in addition to the examples that you may typically think of where, corporations partner with universities, one that I find very interesting in Hartford is where the University of Hartford is the most significant funder of the business improvement district of Upper Albany Avenue, which as opposed to downtown Hartford, which has its own business improvement district that's largely carried by large corporations like Hartford and Travelers. This one is outside of the central business district, and they're very, very small local businesses on that corridor. And besides altruism, the university's interest in that is that is the driveway essentially to their campus, that everyone traverses in, so they would like it to be clean and vibrant and thriving. So I think that can be a really interesting symbiosis between those two. I'll use that as a jumping off point to also say, I do think that there are certain things that, the private sector is just gonna figure out on its own, and you don't have to kind of overly micromanage how it comes about if you just put together a process and environment that is welcoming and clear cut, that it's gonna happen. You don't really have to orchestrate it, but one thing that I think public entities oftentimes do better and is so essential to the overall vision is a sense of playfulness, a sense of whimsy. And you've got such good bones here, I think it could really be a beautiful thing. My one sentence definition of placemaking is to identify that which is uniquely special about a place and then celebrate it consistently in the built environment in kind of a unified but not uniform sort of way. And you see little towns that will do like, some author wrote a children's book and it had a bunny in it. So there'll be like little bunny sculptures that you gotta go find in the different shops or something. Or I was recently in the Cape and they have boards in the stores. I mean, that's just one example. I see you're gonna find banners downtown already. But I think that is a huge opportunity. I mean, in the sense that there's so much you want to do, but there's so little you sometimes have direct control over. And putting a sense of playfulness or whimsy or color or joy into your built environment in a way that's authentic to your town really makes a big difference. In fact, a very famous economic developer who has since passed away, who was kind of the orchestrator of West Hartford Center, which did very, very, very well. He said that the turning point for all of it was putting flower pots on the street and keeping flowers. And after 2 years, that was the turning point, So it can be little things in addition to the big things. I like multi-million-dollar grants too, don't get me wrong.
So do I. So, we've taken the lead in, with funding from the governor's office and based on past experience, recognizing that, Bridgewater is not unlike other communities in New England, that we have outdated zoning and things have changed. We have ridiculous parking requirements and, we have height requirements. And so we've taken the initiative to look at amending our zoning and adopting a form-based code. So we have a predictable, expedited approach for developers. Do developers see that to be an advantage?
100%. Number one question I get out of any developer when pitching a site to is it zoned by right? Is the particular site zoned for what I want to build on it by right? And they'll work in communities where it's not form-based code, but I think the advantage of form-based code is it gives a lot of clarity about what you're looking for in terms of height, setback, materials, all that. And zooming out to the bigger picture, the number one thing developers are looking for and the reason they make such good profit margins is because it's a very risky business. So all they really want to do is minimize risk and uncertainty to the greatest extent possible. And I tried to kind of say, like, what are the top things that attracts developers because they minimize risk and uncertainty? I wrote down by right zoning, sizable lots, meaning not little slivers of lots owned by multiple different people that you somehow have to conglomerate. That can get very, very tricky. Then the third thing was what I termed a good clean process. And to me, a good clean process is kind of three things. Number one, they don't mind going before a planning and zoning commission, but they would prefer not to go to the ZBA and the P and Z and the historic and the architectural review board, because they're very afraid that one board will put a condition on them that the other one doesn't like, and they gotta go around and around. And they like a responsive city staff as well, you know. And back to the zoning regs that they understand, and then, so that was number 3. Number 4 is tax incentives, they always ask. Even if the answer is no, you know, we don't think they're necessary here, they'll always ask. And then the 4th, which Hillary touched on, was strong market demographics, but that can mean different things to different developers. Some of them look at how good is the infrastructure, you know, or the built environment around me. Some look at how strong the job base is, some look at how good the schools are, some look at parks or other public attractions, so it's not a one size fits all.
But and I think, you know, with respect to the demographics, that they're very impressive in Bridgewater. And, you know, one would say, okay, with, you know, a home being listed for over 600,000, then being bid up in 15 days by another 40,000, well over what we're seeing in other communities. Why aren't you seeing the type of retail and restaurants that would want that demographic? And I think, as we mentioned before, because there's not, where those homes are not where those retailers are going to go. Retailers and restaurants want to go where people can have foot traffic, where they can walk down and from where they're living to these businesses, but also for people to go there. So, you know, the idea of, when we talk about transit oriented development, that's not 100% train. That's intermodal micro transit. We can do a much better job with Brockton Area Transit. They're excited to do that. They're a conduit for lots of federal money for transportation improvements. I think that helps the university, particularly on the weekend with international students that don't have the ability to go home, to have opportunities to kind of see things on a regional basis, going to Brockton. So, you know, our opportunity with TOD is unique. Typically, when people talk about TOD, it's all train centric. We're not looking at it that way. But, you know, the opportunity to create destinations is what we're trying to do. It's, you know, I've shared before, Campus Plaza looks the same to me as it did in 1977. Hasn't changed. Maybe you got a facelift in terms of paint, but McDonald's is still in the same location. The footprint is. So that is such a unique opportunity for us in terms of saying, that's an area that we can increase density, improve the zoning, and do a lot with 13 acres of land that's already there. You know, we're not displacing anybody. We're not, no one has their backyard up to Campus Plaza. So, you know, those are opportunities, but, you know, I think to Jamie's point is developers want to make sure they can come in and do this in an expedient manner and not be like, well, yeah, we thought we liked that. So, you know, an important part of the form-based code is having the community have input into that. So that this is what you all as a community have said that you wanted. First presentation I did in February to the town council was, this is what is in your master plan that you adopted last year. I'm here to implement that. We've talked about the fact that we've had great studies done over the last decade plus, but there's been no implementation or execution. We're now doing execution. You know, what we hear is, what I hear is it really going to happen? You know, we've talked about this before, but we're 9 months into this. This is happening. We are painting the baby's room. This is happening, and it's a process. I mean, this is, as I said earlier, we're taking a 10-year plan and looking at it, doing it in 5 years. 4.5 years left now. So we have improvements that we need to make in infrastructure. We're going to do that in that 5 years. There's funding available to do that. We're giving density away to developers potentially. We expect something back. In some instances, as Jamie said, there might be tax stabilization or other incentives we need to offer developers, but we need to be prepared to have those conversations. And I think the development community, Hillary and Jamie can correct me, they're looking, they can go on a Zoom meeting anywhere in the United States now and say, okay, what am I walking into in terms of what's the environment? How hard is that going to be? Are there going to be torches and pitchforks outside of the town hall meeting when I'm there? If that's the case, I'm probably not going to go there. I don't have to. But this plan, I mean, the fact that, you know, we can preserve downtown, I'm talking too much, I know, but I do that. I mean, that, you know, it's a walkable community, we're preserving Central Square, we're not tearing buildings down there. But every time I've had a developer or consultant come, we start at Town Hall, we walk down Broad Street, walk past the old train station for Burger King, walk through the Spring Street lot, walk to the campus, walk back to Town Hall, 15 minutes. 15 minutes, that's stopping to talk, and you know that I can stop and talk. And so, I mean, but the perception is people don't do that. So as we start to fill in some of these blanks, when we look at the potential development sites that we have, we can do something very special. You know, we're not talking about 10-story buildings at Pascal's site. We're talking about something 3, 4, 5. Certainly at Campus Plaza, we can go higher. I think there's an opportunity to work with MBTA to ground lease a portion of that parking lot going forward, because we're not going to need all of that. If the university gets their parking back on the south side of campus, that's an opportunity. If we're able to work with the university on the incubator space with the Plymouth and Hale Street parcel that the university owns, we're starting to fill in some of those missing gaps. But we all collectively have to be on the same page that, yes, this is what we want. And yes, we know there's funding out there. And I don't know if either of you want to add on and just save these people from listening.
Well, this is loosely related. In our prep call, we had talked a little bit about developer expectation for timeline, right? I would say in most communities, for a large mixed-use commercial project, the developers feel comfortable with a process that's gonna take them, they like 6 to 9 months. I've seen cases where they can get something approved in under 6 months and they're like, oh my gosh, yippee. But it's not that that's an expectation that everything, you know, is rubber stamp approved or anything like that, but you know, when you get past 12 months, 14 months, for their land use approvals, that's introducing a significant amount of risk and uncertainty into their overall process. It's driving up their soft costs a great deal. And that's where they start to think, I wouldn't want to do this over again. And keeping in mind that, you know, most of those stick-built style construction cycles would be 12 to maybe 18 months, depending on how bad the winter is and what time they start. So overall, you know, the project that is conceived today probably is a ribbon cutting minimum of 2 years out, sometimes 3 years out, and that's if there's no major delays, no lawsuits, no nothing. So they're trying to time a market 3 years from now.
And understand the cost of materials, they have to order that, it's complicated.
But I'm all for planning and zoning commissions being strict applicators of their zoning regs and demanding a lot from developers because they're getting a lot. They're getting an opportunity to develop a really significant project in a beautiful town and, you know, significantly alter what that town looks like in the long term. So it's great to have high expectations.
Anything else you want to share, Hillary?
No, I think that the trends that you read about all point to density, right? They point to transit, they point to density. And you read about what the projections are for people, how they want to live. It makes sense at this moment in time, according to the data. Certainly other communities and your state too.
I mean, and I think, you know, again, that's the anxiety that I hear a lot is that the D word is a bad word. The D word gets you what you want if you're smart about it. And, you know, what I think this plan captures is this is really a poster child for smart growth because of all the elements that it's looking at: transportation, housing, job creation, you know, utilization of land where you have opportunities, preserving open space. But I think, you know, hearing you all again say, well, this is a really horrible plan, Bob, but thanks for having us. That's good. Because at this point, if anybody has questions or comments that they would like to ask of Vivian Hiller or Jamie, now would be the time. And we'll start with President Moore.
Sure, maybe just a quick question, so. I love the idea of connecting all of these different disconnected pieces, finding a way to create something. We often hear feedback from people where they might just want to do one piece of the puzzle. Like, if you could just fix the old friendlies, the rest of it. And I'd be curious, just in your experience, is it enough to invest in, or do the single projects ever really change that? Or do you need these bigger systematic changes?
They do, but you all have to be the enforcers of the vision. For example, in Trumbull, suburban town, they went through a period where they had kind of office parks, you know, like Canon Print would have their big office there, and it had been empty for 10 years. So little by little, those were getting redeveloped into either multifamily housing or senior living for the most part. And there were no sidewalks anywhere. That's not what was popular in the 1950s when these parks were first built. So every time a project came before P&Z would have to say, as a condition of approval, you're required to put in a sidewalk of this dimension, it's gotta be approved by the town engineer. And the developer would be like, why? It's a sidewalk to nowhere, you know, it doesn't connect to anything. But as stewards of the vision, the P&Z had to be the heavies that said, no, you are going to do this because we have a vision for what this place is gonna look like in 20 years, and every single play that happens, every move we make has to be, you know, in connection. So I do believe it can be done, and I do think you all, you know, serve a big party in here, because it's not easy to do, to consistently, you know, with every single application. But every little piece matters.
And I think you're saying, even with the individual projects, they're done within the context of the larger.
Absolutely.
There is no one-off project.
Yeah.
Suzie?
Hi, I'm Councilor Robinson. Thank you so much for being here. I have two questions. One, I think Bob actually kind of slipped it in there. Is our plan good? And maybe to add into that, if you know, it's ambitious enough, it's too ambitious, and it's attractive to developers. So maybe there's one, two questions there. That was for the first set. Then the second one is, I'm curious, since we are hinging so much of the premise around transit-oriented development, if we can get that density here, about your experience, how long does it then take for retailers to be able to commit to just basically to get to the full occupancy?
I can only answer that by pointing to an example, because we, you know, again, no crystal ball. You guys all been to Providence? Sorry, I keep bringing up Providence, but that's my home turf. We moved a highway. So 195 was moved and 19 developable acres were opened up. Zoning, special zoning was put in that district so that developers knew exactly what would happen in the process, how long it would take. It was quick. It took a long time to get going. You're at the mercy of economic changes. But fast forwarding to today, I was just there touring a beautiful building that Wexford builds, 225 Dyer Street, that has shared office complex with CIC. It's got public transit in and out of it with busing and walk to the train station. I looked over and I saw a new lab building being built that we're repping as part of that. Brown has committed to building. So it takes a lot of time. Housing was developed, dense housing, 5.5-story housing developed in there. Gosh, Providence needs more housing. Some of the retail, and to be totally honest, still not filled. It's about getting the people in, the foot traffic. It takes time to build the plan. Trader Joe's just moved in. my favorite store. And all of a sudden, the retail around that just filled up. So again, this isn't gonna happen tomorrow. We've got an excellent leader here who's got a really solid strategy, plan, thesis, estate behind it, but it doesn't happen overnight. So that's really the only way I can answer that question, because every place is different, but it certainly has all the elements.
Couple things I really like about the plan. First of all, I like short lists, and I think yours is essentially centered around a list of 3 things: the business development, the culture, and smart growth. And you could, if you really were pressing it down to its most compact form, you could think about that as opportunity and quality of life or quality of experience. And you heard from Hillary how overwhelmingly strong quality of life workplace experience is to modern day consumers. But that's all well and good, but you gotta have a paycheck, and an opportunity. So I like that it's easy to remember. It's got a small list of things to really focus on. I generally feel that a very small, concentrated plan is more effective than one that tries to scattershot everywhere. And I think that philosophy for me also applies to placemaking. Many of my municipal partners will ask, okay, we've got $5 million and we want to improve placemaking in our community. And they often will want to spread it across 12 or 13 different places, because they're all worthy, but it dilutes the efficacy of what you can get done. So I personally believe in more of a limited, concentrated approach, and I think your plan is rooted in that. It's easy to read and remember. I think you've also done a couple of really good cornerstones, namely the comprehensive plan and the zoning refresh. To be honest, developers may not read your whole comp plan, but they're definitely going to look at your zoning regs right away to understand how clean they are, and they'll probably either ask their friends or have someone on staff watch your videos and see how a zoning hearing goes, and they'll probably meet with your local staff and see how that goes. So in terms of ambition, it's a famous Daniel Burnham quote, make no little plans, they have not the magic to stir men's blood. In other words, nothing worth doing is easy. And I was kind of daydreaming as I drove up here, but I was still focused, but my mind was thinking creatively. And if my math was more or less correct, I believe that in about 32 years, Bridgewater will be celebrating its 400th anniversary. And wow, that's really exciting to imagine what it's going to look like and what it's going to feel like and what the faces of the people standing in that parade are going to be in 32 years. Or, a child who was born this year could be there with their young family in 32 years. It's not that far away, but it's just far away enough that this town could accomplish a significant portion of this beautifully ambitious comprehensive plan. So I'm going to put it on my calendar. You guys let me know what the parade is. I want to see what it looks like. I'm really excited. I think you can achieve a lot.
So I think one of the things you said, and I think one of the things we struggle with, from what I've heard of Bridgewater, is that even though our median house price is up and our median income is comparable to area towns, per capita income, I think if we look compared to surrounding towns is probably low. And I've always been told that's because there's a number of university students that use it as their residence, and they had zeros or below because college students aren't making that much money. And then we have the correctional facility. So if we're looking to bring more density downtown, I also think we need to bring, and I think you said it's a demographic that has, dollars they can spend to at a Trader Joe's or some of these other places we talk about higher end stores. So how do you see, in addition to density, how do you see us attracting that demographic to these types of buildings? Is it design? Is it ownership type? Is it How do you see us attracting a higher demographic downtown to be able to spend on this?
Sure.
Because I think if we get, college students are great. But I think if we get a bunch of apartments that are more geared towards college students, we're gonna have more pizza joints and things of that nature. So how do you see us getting that higher demographic?
In some ways, I do think it'll happen naturally as it course of the market, and by that I mean. New product is expensive to build, and therefore the rents are gonna be at a premium for brand new apartment products. So naturally, there'll be a premium built in. We also know that most renters are willing to pay a premium actually for private space. They would rather pay a little more per square foot and have a studio than have to share it with a roommate. I think that's a little bit different than how things used to be even 10 years ago. So you could think about unit mix when you're talking to developers. And lastly, shared amenities and very premium amenities are something that renters are very much willing to pay a premium for. So, I mean, I've seen all sorts of different things. It's not just the standard gym anymore. It's like this movie screening room with like the popcorn gourmet in the back, and there's the bowling alley in one, and I mean, dog amenities are always a big hit, that sort of thing. So you could, and that's something that you can have some influence over, even though it's an interior aspect of a building. And of course, certain small design details like facade articulation and transparency inside the windows and glazing, and what type of roof you put on and its pitch, all that will be outlined in your form-based code, and that tends to signal certain subtype of architecture versus one flat facade that goes on for 250 feet. It's like very punched windows and that sort of thing, very low detail. So those are a couple ideas of how you can attract, the sort of demographic that you're looking for. And at the same time, I will say, I think the demographic diversity of a place is part of what makes it tick and vibrant in different ways at different times of day. So I think in some ways, what I'm really trying to say is, with an increase in population, one subgroup would not stand out, so much, because everybody's just going to be a part of that, and the community will blend, I think.
I just want to add to that is that, currently our zoning doesn't allow for the type of housing that we're looking for. In my conversations, with Vinnie's colleagues from the university, is that the university struggles to attract particularly adjunct faculty or young faculty members, because they can't afford to live in this area and there's no product for them. We have a lot of student housing, we have a lot of single family housing, and then we have some 40Bs scattered outside, but we don't have a diversification of housing types in the downtown area because our current zoning doesn't allow that. As I said earlier, in terms of where we see a niche, I don't want to underestimate what the potential of that cybersecurity program can be in terms of attracting businesses here, keeping professionals that are coming out of the university here, giving them an opportunity to live here. We don't have that opportunity now. I mean, I use Christy, who's our newest employee, as an example, that her and her husband, two young professionals, found two places to live within walking distance of downtown that two young professionals would want to live. And so, I mean, again, we don't have that product to attract the type of demographic that we want to see. And through zone changes, through the form-based code, we were able to do that.
I want to add one thing before I forget, and it goes on to what both of you just said, it's the sustainability piece too. So in all this new development, professionals, people in general want to see a building that has adopted clean energy standards.
Yeah,
It's the expectation. It's almost like if you don't have it, it's not going to be an attractive building. So I read through not the whole Inflation Reduction Act, but the IRA to try to figure out for CBRE representing building owners, what's in there for building owners? Well, heck, there's a lot of tax credits and grant programming for sustainable buildings. And it also draws that young professional, I really anyone who cares about it. So I think that's an important piece to the design.
Dennis?
Thank you. There's no question that housing is a major issue in this state, probably around the country. And I think we need to do our part to help provide that housing. Not only, for everybody, affordable housing, housing for seniors, first-time home buyers and things of that nature. So I do think that something needs to be done. However, it needs to be done responsibly. It needs to be done in a way that fits our community. And from what I hear from some people in the community, there is some resistance to more housing, more big developments and things of that nature. But I tell them, I said, well, we need something. We don't need it in every single corner of the town. We do need to do something. Tonight, I've heard a lot about the Campus Plaza project that's been toted about, but there are so many other things in the downtown area that I'd like to see more initiative in. And I'm not hearing that. I don't need to be critical, but I'm not hearing that at the time. Because I don't even know what the owners of Campus Plaza are thinking. I mean, are we going to create a zoning bylaw to force them to change what they're doing? Do they want to do it? I hope at some point during this whole process, we hear from them as to what is this feasible for them? They're the ones that are going to spend the money if they do it themselves or sell it to a developer. The train station moving, I've been in favor of that all along, but I understand the finances of that could be a problem. But we have a project that's been proposed on Perkins Foundry land across the street from the Campus Plaza. Now there's a developer who wants to do something, has deep pockets, is ready to go. And then we have Broad Street and the town common, and we have the mobile station. We have other things in the town that have been sitting there for an awful long time that I'd like to see. Like you say, it only takes a flower pot and things will happen. All it will take is some of those Jersey barriers to be moved from the town common, and we can see some changes going on. So that's what I'd like to see. I'm not opposed to what's being proposed for Campus Plaza. I don't know the scale of what I'd be comfortable with. But I don't know if it's something they wanted. So they're ready to do it. But I think we have other areas too in the town, particularly the downtown, that I think need to be focused on that could draw a catalyst.
So we have separate tab on the website focusing on Central Square, being historic preservation, the pedestrian improvements, traffic improvements around Central Square are critical. We're not advocating tearing buildings down, but getting some of those current property owners to buy into the vision. If we're able to access community development block grant facade improvement programs, are they willing to put up any of their money to make some of those improvements? Those are conversations that we will have. That CDBG funding cycle will start in the late fall and with announcements in March. So we're queuing up for that. In terms of Campus Plaza, I reached out to Federal Realty, I think the second day I was here, and their initial response to me was they were going to sell that property. And because it doesn't fit in to anything that they have in their portfolio, which are typically mixed use projects, similar to what we're discussing. When we talked about the fact that the zoning was going to change and there could be higher density, more flexibility in terms of use, they became interested. And I talked to them on almost every 2 weeks religiously. They took a little bit of a hit in the last couple of weeks because in some of their, what they call power centers, they had Bed Bath & Beyond and Christmas Tree Shop as tenants. Well, both just went bankrupt and left big gaping holes in that portfolio. But certainly with the zone change, we're not forcing them to do anything. zoning does not make you have the right to tell somebody you have to do something different than what you're already done. But as savvy developers, and as Jamie talked about, particularly REITs, they have their own funding sources, they can fund off of other projects. They're looking, I mean, they're interested in saying, if there's more that we can do here, we're gonna do that if it makes sense. If we can sell the property to somebody else that can come in and do this, that makes sense. So Federal, as an example, does not want to be in the housing market. They would develop the commercial space. They would be looking for a developer that is experienced doing housing to come in and partner with them.
So if the zoning change goes through, obviously, the current property owners would not be forced to comply. But if they were to sell it, then the new owners may have to.
No, the new zoning is not going to, and the MBTA community legislation doesn't allow you to do that anyways. It's just giving them an incentive to do more. And, so we talk about highest best use. A 13-acre site with 1-story park in the front, 1960s construction is not considered to be highest and best use. With respect to the Perkins Foundry, I didn't like that project as it was presented initially with respect to the commercial buildings. We've made big progress working with them for them to redesign and reorientate those buildings to be consistent with what we see the vision to be. And we have a local restaurant owner that's looking to have another restaurant in town. I think that project is going to be successful. I think it's going in the right direction now. And to Jamie's point, developers want to see, okay, you're willing to work with us, we'll work with you.
Yeah, and one other thing is, developers and designers are highly visual, of course, visual learners. And when talking with Bob and some of my other colleagues who work at Bridgewater more consistently, I asked, do the local leaders have 2 or 3 communities that if you ask them, well, we want Bridgewater to look like this, even if it's a place in Colorado, is there places like that? And what I had heard was like, not really, we don't really have a list like that, which is okay. But maybe as you do your form-based code, I've seen some that, have pictures inside of it, but even if you don't do it in the regs, even a simple 2 or 3 page, like, we like this, we don't like that, in terms of, we like this residential because we like the windows on this, or we like the lighting on that, they want to give you what you want. They, again, like precision and very clear direction, so that's always something interesting.
The residents of the town that talked to me about this is, they understand it's a housing need.
Yeah,
They are fearful that if something like this went to Campus Plaza, where would they go to do their shopping? This is
where would the new residents go to do their
not
shopping?
the new residents would have all the shops right there. That'd be, 4-story buildings with apartments
Okay,
with commerce on the
Okay.
bottom.
so where would existing residents go to do
They're
their
used to going
shops?
down there to Roach Brothers or Burlington, where are they gonna say, well, that's their territory now, it's like, where are they gonna go to shop and things like that. I said, well, you could still go down there, I don't know what the parking situation would be then, but they're worried that they'll be, where do we go?
Are they supporting, again, the time I've been here, since Market Basket opened in West Bridgewater, I think there's been a big sucking noise out of
Right.
Roach Brothers, so, again, I think that, we look at, it's a very walkable community, that, I think, my next white paper is gonna be on parking and traffic, but, we can debate whether we have a parking problem or parking management problem, but it's just changing people's perception. The idea is that every business there now is going to be displaced. It's just creating a better space for them and more probably a predictable source of revenue for them. But another point I think I want to make is that, and I did a workshop at the library last Monday, is that we have, as a community, significant need to invest in infrastructure, water and sewer. These are not small ticket items. These investments have to be made whether we do anything new or not. So I think the question that some residents have to ask, Do you want to pay for that, or would you like somebody else to pay for that? And we can pay for that through some state funding, some federal funding, and increasing the amount of tax revenue, property taxes that are coming into town. We're trying to do this in a respectable way and in a smart way, but those bills are gonna come due whether we do anything. Central Square as it exists now is not sustainable. It's not. You just walk around, it's not. Some of those buildings are in ridiculous disrepair because we have property owners that don't feel the need to make an investment in it. But they're making money off of a building that is hard on your eyes. So I mean, I think, we're incentivizing in different ways people to reinvest in the community, take pride in the community. I've said it that I think the old town hall is a real advantage that the town has. We talk about cultural tourism, that people come here because it's a historic and walkable downtown. Those are all elements of what this plan is. So tonight, we didn't focus a lot on Central Square, to be fair, Dennis. I wanted this to be, there are challenges for new development. There are economic realities, there's realities in the marketplace. Central Square is critically important to what vision to reality is. It's in the logo. I mean, that's Central Square. So I mean, we're not ignoring that at all. I mean, I often look at it as there's three legs to the school. There's Central Square, there's Campus Plaza area, and there's BSU. Those are the three legs of the school. They don't feel connected right now. I mean, there are pedestrian improvements that we need to make in Central Square. There are traffic improvements we need to make, but we're gonna find resources that it's the but-for test. If you didn't do this, you would be going into your own pocket to pay for some of these. I don't think any taxpayer in Bridgewater wants to hear that. Hell, my tax bill is gonna double. Because water and sewer, those don't go away. So until you can't flush, you don't realize how important those things are. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Eric, just an additional question. You mentioned, where you talked a lot about residential density. And I'm not sure that that term is familiar to everyone. So maybe could you describe a little bit about what residential density is and why it's required to sort of make the commercial atmosphere successful?
Sure. So from a technical perspective, especially in cities, the term floor area ratio or FAR is often used to describe how dense residential unit is. So, 1 unit per acre is kind of a flat layer cake, and then you go up to 10 and it's kind of a much higher layer cake, and that sort of thing. Suburban towns don't often use FAR as much, they use units per acre. But your question is about why is there this sweet spot where developers will say, okay, I'll go build that, but if I can only get 50 units, I'm not gonna go build that. And that really comes down to the return on investment and economies of scale. That each unit, they're figuring a certain margin per year on that lease. And they have these massive spreadsheets with the unit counts that say, okay, does this cover all of my costs and construction labor and all the other things that go into making a commercial building. So there's that aspect of it. Most of them find that minimum 125, up to 250 is the sweet spot. I do know developers will do smaller. In those cases, either the land basis is very low. For example, they got the land from the town, and the town gave them the land at a very discounted price in exchange for a density that was much lower than what they would otherwise need. So that's kind of like a tax incentive, but in a different way, that the land basis was low. Or they had some other way that they were filling the financing gap between the cost per unit of building and what they're gonna get for that. The other point is sense of community. So I've talked to developers and architects that talk about when you get way up over that 250 mark, it gets too big. And residents don't like it, and so the units don't lease well. So that's why they kind of put the max at 250, and when I say that, I'm talking about what I consider to be a more small city or suburban product. Obviously, in downtown Boston, there's towers, you know, and that's a different story. But for that stick-built product type, there is a sense of too large, and it's not so much that the deal doesn't pencil out anymore, it's that the units don't lease up as well. Because residents feel that they're kind of miss the sense of the camaraderie connection.
So I just want to add, so under the MBTA communities legislation, you are required to allow at least 15 units per acre. So if we look at the current location of the MBTA platform, and that the requirement based on existing housing inventory is that, not that it has to be built, but zoning has to allow for an additional 1,400 units within a half-mile radius of wherever that platform is. We will never achieve that if we didn't move the platform, because the BSU campus does not count. It's wetlands to the south. We've never seen any new development, even though Waterford Village was zoned for additional. It never happened. There's no other land to develop in that area. So by relocating the platform, you know, we have the ability to meet that 1,400. But when you look at a campus plaza, if you were in the southeast corner by Styles and Hart, you might want to be 30 units an acre, because you might be able to go a little higher there because of got parkland behind you. So I think those are the things we want to look at. In looking at the Pascal site or looking at some of these other sites, you're not going to get your 3 or 4 stories there with ground floor commercial retail. And that's the scale you want, because that's what surrounds it. But some of these other sites, you could actually go a little bit higher, and you want to, but you know, it is the whole purpose of this is at the end of the day, in my experience in municipalities, we never talk about the economics of a deal. If the economics aren't there, you don't have a deal. I mean, that's just, you don't build anything unless a developer should get a return on their investment. They're taking the risk. The last thing a community wants is a developer to fail in the middle of a project, and we're left with a half-built building. So, you know, again, it's a kabuki dance of sorts in terms of making all of the pieces work together. But you know, Michael and I had this conversation. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, Eric. We're early on in this process. And we're showing that we're not just talking about it or we're doing it, but we're setting the pieces on the chessboard. We haven't moved any of them yet, but we want to be in a position to move them when the time is right. And Hillary asked me, you know, what's the opposition? I don't think there's opposition. I think, you know, what we're trying to do now is just do education and as much as we can, and not feed people through a fire hose with information. That's why we're going to do the white papers. But this is a process, and this is an important step in that process. And we need to continue to talk. I mean, my office is offered. I mean, I will go talk in people's backyards at picnic tables. We've been to the senior center, we've been to the library, we're doing a 55 and older community. We're reaching out to the sports teams. We need people to come on September 26th to the workshop. We need the communities. At the end of the day, this is not my plan or Michael's plan. This is the community's plan. This is what we want to see, but it's important that the community understand what it takes to get what they want, and that they can have some pride in what comes out of this.
Maybe just one thing I didn't hear you say, but I want to confirm I understand. So, in addition to all of those reasons, we want density to attract developers, it's profitable. So we think there's that noise. Another thing I heard is businesses in a town like this really can't be successful unless people are walking past their store. Right? The idea of like the drive-in customers who come and shop or some, but to really make those valuable, where you attract all the stores that we attract, we need to have enough people there walking around to the store.
Feet on the sidewalks.
Yeah, and so I think my question around residential density is really about understanding that means we might have a few more people in this area than maybe we want in other areas of town, but it's because we need that to make
Yeah.
retail properties.
And Hillary kind of touched on this earlier, I'm sure you and your broker colleagues, seen this process many times. What the retailers will do when there's a site selection is they have these data stores that allow them to drop a pin anywhere on a map and set a radius, and it will tell them exactly how many houses are there and what the average income is within that. So they typically will drop a 3 and 5 and 10 mile radius, depending on whether it's a big box store or an inline store or whatever. Smaller the store, the smaller the catchment area or radius. So back to the density question, you know, if you're talking about a single family homes on a 1/4 acre lot on that circle, and you drop that again in a place where there are pockets of higher density, it's gonna benefit the whole catchment area, because that's how they calculate it, is kind of these concentric circles.
We'll also physically go to the site and watch the site visit. It's fascinating. Watch who's going by, how it feels, how active it is, multiple times, very careful. It's interesting.
Hi, Paul Murphy, town councilor. Just have a 2-part question, maybe you touched upon sort of what we were just talking about there. And I know we talked about demographics, maybe what we want to see in the town. But I was curious to know from past experiences of working with the mixed use buildings like this, if there are demographics that typically exist that you tend to see for people moving into a location like this, like young professionals, with a certain age demographic that you see that moving to this kind of mixed use housing. And then the second part will be the retail piece. So obviously, you just kind of described how retailers look at a plot of property, but I would assume the population and what the population looks like. So are there trends in certain retailers that we see moving into these mixed use based on that population?
Great questions. They're broad questions. And what I've sort of found in real estate, it's very specific to your area. Retailers will look at the analysis will be density, will be income demographics. What their individual thresholds are, I don't know. I mean, maybe they have a similar model, maybe they don't. So it's a hard question to answer because it really depends on the retailer and the jurisdiction. Who's gonna move into it? You build a beautiful mixed use development here. Who's gonna move in there? What's gonna depend on the cost of the units and who it appeals to and who's looking at the time and what businesses are nearby and the cost of real estate in the next town or. So I don't know, I can't answer it where I said, because you guys have a better shot at that.
I agree with you that it's, you know, the classic answer, it depends. But I will offer, one observation on each of those topics. So in Hartford, which is a very soft market, it's upside down, every single deal is a brownfield and it takes millions of dollars of gap financing to get anything going, you know, it's a really tough development environment, but it's my home and I love it. There have been, I think, 2,200 units of apartment housing constructed in Hartford, which is a very small footprint city, in the last 8 years or so. And everybody was so worried about overbuilding, you know, that they're gonna sit empty, or that what you'll do is sometimes called in the industry a flight to quality. So I'll just move from my okay apartment downtown to this better apartment downtown, but it's just gonna transfer the vacancy problem to the building next door. That didn't happen. Over 50%, I think it was even higher than that, but I can confidently say well over 50% of people who moved into those units were from outside of Hartford and in many cases outside of Hartford County. So it was very successful in attracting new population. And I think that trend has also been true in New Haven, which has stronger market fundamentals and doesn't need as much help to get a development going. But they've made a very strong play to try to capture that sort of multifamily growth for the state of Connecticut, because not many towns in Connecticut are embracing growth. And it's been a very successful strategy for them in terms of attracting new population, which I think is part of your goal here. And the one major trend in retailers that I would say is it's really all about services and or food. You know, goods-based retail has a really, really hard time, i.e. Christmas tree shops, i.e. Bed Bath & Beyond. Why? Well, because we bought it on Amazon instead and it got delivered to our door. So I'm seeing what does get filled up is largely food. Food and beverage is still pretty strong. Or some sort of service, whether it's, you know, massage or salon or dog spa or something like that. And that, except for very special circumstances, the national brand retailers that we all want, you know, they're very, 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 very selective. So I think it's not a failure to develop your retail attraction strategy that's more centered around regional, like, oh, this restaurant did really well 3 times over. Do they want to open a single location? That could be a very effective strategy. Rather than like, you know, Trader Sam's or us. Trader Joe's, yeah, Trader Joe's.
I will say, I did put data on this, really spot on, the data I found, continued economic uncertainty remains, declining consumer sentiment, and retail, although those two things, retail sales rose 4.2% year over year in May 2023. Inflation remains a burden, spending power remains solid. Categories that weakened: home goods sales fell 4.5%, electronic sales fell 4.1%, clothing was flat, but department stores fell 3%. Sporting goods sales rose 2.5%, and e-commerce was strong.
Did it have food and beverage?
It did report, yeah.
So I think,
I
Paul,
think you were.
to your point is that when I looked at the marketing material that Federal had when they were positioning the property for sale, as Jamie said, they did their 1, 3, and 5 pin, and that in each category, over 50% of the population individually was over $100,000 a year annually. You know, I think in my conversation with the community, we have a lot of seniors right now that are aging in place that would like to stay in Bridgewater, but don't have an opportunity to do that. So, you know, 55 and older is not necessarily a nursing home, it's active 55 and older. So that's an opportunity, you know, to do 2 things: to create a market for housing that would like to be in an area like that, but also frees up single family homes for families that want to move into the community. So, you know, that's kind of a byproduct of that, but again, I go back to, we don't have zoning in place that kind of allows us to take advantage of those demographics. You know, I have more people tell me that their favorite restaurant is in a different town. In my conversation, you know, with Federal Realty, the woman said to me, "You don't have any good restaurants in your town." I said, "Well, you have the 99 as a tenant," and she said, "That's not a good restaurant." So I mean, that's, you know, kind of, but I think on the retail side, I mean, I think that this is a challenge for development because it's hard to finance. You're going to see more local and regional businesses, but they're not credit tenants. That's not a lease that a developer can take to a bank and say, "I want a lower interest rate because I have that tenant." Those are gone. But, you know, we use Mashpee Commons as an example of what a smaller version of that, what this could be. But I think those are the types of, you know, retail you're going to see that support that kind of restaurant type of
And
business.
I just wanted to thought on that, there are some communities, it's not ultra rare, somewhere in the middle, it's not super common either, but there are communities that will fund the tenant fit outs in the same way that they will fund facade improvements. The reason it's a little, you know, not universally popular is, let's say that you help a bakery, you know, get their commercial cooking equipment for their bakery, and then 2 years later they go out of business, you know, that it's not as solid as a facade that's still gonna be there for 10, 20 years, and you know that. But it is a strategy you can consider, and we certainly have found that when it comes to existing small businesses who you're trying to ensure don't get left behind and also feel the love. Micro grants can be extremely effective. I'm talking, $750 to $3,000, and with not a lot of strings attached and some reporting, but allowing them to tell you, we had one like CPA kind of tax storefront who got some new software and her business doubled in a year, and they can be really transformative, those micro grants. So I guess my theme tonight is all about the little things, the flower pots and micro grants.
So I talked to Bob about this a little bit, and I think to Eric's point that, I don't want to keep going back to the demographics, but you need people walking by, but you need people with money in their pockets. And I think it's important that we would mix of housing types, whether it be rental and affordable, but I also think that, and I don't know if we're gonna address this in the form-based code, but maybe we give density bonuses for high density to, and I don't know if the 65+ market would have more disposable income. I don't know if people that buy condos would have more disposable income. But I believe there is a way in the form-based code that we can kind of try to mix housing ownership types as well, because that might also drive the different demographic of town, people that may be willing to buy in town and put a stake down in town as opposed to rent, or people that want to buy 55+ that don't want to go to the outskirts of town. Is that something that you see working into the form-based code that might be able to help the demographics downtown?
Well, I'll just briefly say two things, and I know many of you are P and Z commissioners, so you preach to the choir here, but number one, zoning dictates use, not ownership, so there's very little you can do in terms of dictating, the ownership style, or there are certain exceptions with regard to age, but probably not zoning. It probably wouldn't be a zoning type tool, is my guess.
Yeah, and I don't think so either, but I think, when we looked at just conceptual, what could exist at Campus Plaza, we've shown a variety of different housing. We've shown townhouses, which would be suitable for condominiums. We've shown kind of a mid-rise. So I think that, the market will find that spot, but, I think again, if you were able to build condos downtown, I think there's a pent up market for that, if there truly is.
So, yeah.
And home ownership can be mixed income as well. It doesn't have to be, and that's, something that we've talked about, giving density bonuses for more mixed income units. So I think it's something you could work in, but we always have to be aware of what the fair housing regulations are as well, but.
And one other thing you can talk about, I go back to the unit count. Maybe you want more 2-bedroom units than studios. Maybe the developer comes in pretty high on micro units to start, and you push back on that. You said you want a different mix of unit count.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Sorry for keeping you here as long as we did, but I think hopefully it was a good conversation. Thank you for your patience. I want to sincerely thank Hillary and Jamie. Jamie coming from Connecticut, Hillary coming from Rhode Island, on a Tuesday night, middle of summer, be with you folks. So thank you both. I hope you all found it to be helpful as we continue to go forward, that you'll continue to interact with us in terms of feedback, and please talk to people about coming to the workshop on the 26th. We have 5 weeks. I will make myself available to talk to whomever, just so people, again, if they have questions, they have anxiety about it, we want to address that. And I always say the only bad question is a question you don't ask. And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there or misconceptions. We're not going to change everybody's mind. Not everyone's going to love this, but that's fine. As long as they understand why we're doing it, or there's one aspect of it that they like and it's been successful. So thank you.
Thank you very much.